Sara Crown. I'm the archivist at the Santa Monica History Museum. I'm here with Carolyne and Bill Edwards of the Quinn Research Center, and we're going to talk today a bit about the Broadway neighborhood in Santa Monica. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. It's nice to be here.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a bit about what the Broadway neighborhood was and where was it?
Well, the Broadway neighborhood was, the area of concentration for us was has been between 14th Street and 20th Street. But during the late 30s, 40s, 50s, and up until the early 60s, it was a self-contained, thriving community of African Americans, Mexican Americans, and other ethnic groups. And it was a wonderful place where people just enjoyed each other's company. And it was, like I said, it was a self-thriving community. And pretty much everything that people needed was located right there in that community.
So, for example, stores, restaurants, churches?
Absolutely. There were stores, there were churches, there were fraternal organizations, there were schools, 2 schools within the community and the neighborhood. And so a lot of the kids who grew up in the area, they either went to one school or the other, but they were all close when it came to, they had close relationships when it came to neighborhood fun. And they visited each other's homes and, played during the weekend and, just a great place to live.
And you worked very closely with the museum on putting this exhibition together. What do you hope people will take away once they see the exhibition?
Well, I'm hoping that, once they see a lot of these buildings from the past, they will be able to see and reflect upon the present right now. And as people are going down the street, when they look at one of these buildings, they can say, oh yes, I remember finding out the information about that building, particularly the ones that are still standing and look very much the same as they had back in the 50s and 60s.
So you talked a little bit about, as you've studied the history of African Americans in Santa Monica, you found a possible pattern of migration within the city. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, there have been little pockets of different nationalities popping up in places. I know when my father came to California, specifically Santa Monica, back in the early 30s, the first place that he landed and where he lived was in not actually the Belmar community, but south of the Belmar community, right at 4th and Bay. And that's where he lived, along with many other African Americans. And quite a few of his friends settled there, and there were pockets of people who lived in the area, for instance, like where the Rand Corporation is located now, along Main Street, Ocean Avenue. But then in the meantime, this area extended to on the outskirts of downtown Santa Monica, around 5th Street between Colorado and Broadway. Now, another pocket of people started popping up in the Broadway community as people started moving further east, because further east of downtown Santa Monica was unincorporated. That's where the factories, the type of factories that they had, the industrial area, that's where it was located. The clay factories, that's where those were located. Edgemar Farms, they had there were lima bean fields back in there. So, it was practically not as populated as it was, say, around the coast area of Santa Monica. And so we noticed that African Americans really started settling in around 1910 in the Broadway community.
Can you describe a little bit about what happened to the Broadway neighborhood? Why, and I should note, we're talking today in 2022, so it's many years later, but you mentioned that the Broadway neighborhood thrived through the early 1960s. What is it that changed? Was there any specific factor?
Absolutely.
Mr. Allen, gentleman by Mr. Allen, we took a tour of Santa Monica, and when he pointed out around Broadway, over on Stewart, in that area, he used to point out homes that so-and-so lived here, so-and-so lived here, so-and-so lived here. I can't remember the names, but he pointed out a lot of different places where blacks used to live. I had no idea about Carolyne Baptist Church. After listening to him talk about Carolyne Baptist Church, then I realized that Mr. Carter's wife was she knew my superintendent where I went to school in Texas.
And that's Blanche Carter.
Blanche Carter.
And then just to clarify, the man who gave you this tour, was that Mr. Lloyd Allen?
Mr. Lloyd Allen.
Mm-hmm. But going along with what Bill was saying about Mr. Allen taking us on this guided tour of Santa Monica and the Broadway community, that's really when we started thinking, this information and this history needs to be brought to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And just to go back to what you were asking, Sarah, about what is it that changed all of this vibrant energy in the Broadway community, it was unfortunately and fortunately the concept of moving towards modernization and the fast track and the concept of freeways. Now, don't get me wrong, we all drive the freeways every day, and I drove the freeway every day, 5 days a week, from the San Fernando Valley to Santa Monica every day. And so it was a convenience for me. But unfortunately, the way that the 10 freeway came through Santa Monica, it sliced directly through the Broadway community. And it really upset the flow of a particular community because of the fact that people were displaced from their homes between, say, Michigan and Olympic. These people had to pick up their roots, and they ended up having to move someplace else where that money that was given to them, which was a meager amount, where it would take them, where they could purchase a home for their family. And that ended up being either Los Angeles, Inglewood, and some of the families moved to the San Fernando Valley to Coquino. And so these people were no longer being able to patronize these businesses that were there. And so if you don't have customers coming to, say, your gas station or your market or your restaurant, then how are you going to pay your bills? And so that had an impact on the businesses and the community in Broadway. And so it was like a domino effect. One thing affects something else, and then something else, and something else. So, and so it's our desire to not only show you what Broadway, to show everybody who comes to the exhibition, what Broadway used to be, as opposed to what it is now. There are still businesses there, but it's not the community, neighborhood feeling. It's more of a place where you might go once a month to go get your your nails done, or some other facility that might be located there, but it's not a part of your everyday living. And that's a sad thing that I miss seeing from the early 50s up until now. I can really see a difference.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Quinn Research Center, which you and Bill founded?
Okay, well, I'll let Bill get started.
Back in, I think my wife and I decided to start the Quinn Research about 2011. And that's when we got the idea that we would do something with the history that he had accumulated, and also her mother. There was we call it the magic trunk that she had. And during the time we just started going through the trunk, and we found a lot of history of Santa Monica. And I had no idea about Santa Monica during that time. A lot of the things we seeing now is something that it was new to me. And then after my wife and I got married, this is when we really started looking into, let's do something with it. And so this is how we got started.
And just as a little side note too, you know, my uncle, Dr. Al Quinn, he had done so much in the community from the time that he left high school up until his death, that Bill and I felt as though we wanted to do something to pay tribute to him, because he was a great collector too, along with my mother, brother and sister, ran the family. And so out of tribute to him, along with my mother, we decided, well, you know, we have all of these historical records and treasures, and we need to let people be able to see where we've come from. And so that's something that we had always had in the back of our mind, and because of the History Museum here, and because of our collaboration with you and everything, this has become a dream come true, and we are able to display a lot of this information. So thank you.
Well, thank you.